Hello, everyone. I'm going to give it about one more minute before we officially get started as people are still getting logged in. We have a big group today, and I can see that people are still working on getting logged in, so we'll give them some time. Looks like a few more people are still getting signed in. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Carrie Pascal, and I'm the Director of Outreach here at Team Guardify. Prior to this role, I worked directly with child advocacy centers and also in a district attorney's office providing direct services to families and victims. Guardify, if you don't know, is a digital evidence management solution designed to support child advocacy centers, child protective services professionals, prosecutors, advocates, law enforcement, and others across the country in securely managing, storing, and safeguarding critical evidence. Excuse me. We're so honored to host today's webinar, Building Bridges, Collaborative Approaches for Navigating Problematic Sexual Behavior. At Guardify, we're committed to supporting victim-serving agencies through innovative technology. We also stand with the dedicated professionals working with juveniles to intervene early and redirect problematic behavior, making today's topic especially meaningful. With April being Child Abuse Prevention Month, Guardify would like to take a moment to honor everyone on this call who plays a vital role in both preventing child abuse and protecting children in your communities. So for all of you who do that important work, thank you for the critical role you play in your community. I've got to change this slide. So sorry. I'm not used to this format. All right. Couple housekeeping notes before I turn it over to our amazing presenter. If you would like a copy of the presentation slides today, you can access them in the chat box. My amazing coworker, Melissa, is going to put them in the chat box. She's going to put them in there more than once. So if you forget to pull them up, and you start to wonder where they can be found, just go back to the chat box. You'll find them there. Also, please look out for an email that you will receive in your inbox later this afternoon that's going to explain how you can complete today's evaluation form, and that's going to allow you to receive your certificate of completion. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them in the Q&A box. You can submit them at any time. We've got a very large group today, so we're not going to answer questions during the presentation. We're going to save them all for the end. But we may not get to all of them. So what we're going to do is ask the questions that we have time for at the end, and then we're going to allow our presenter to address any unanswered questions in email form after the presentation. So if you have a burning question, it is going to get answered one way or the other, but please put them in the chat box. I'm sorry, not in the chat box, in the Q&A box, not the chat box. Thank you. All right, I want you all to be aware of some upcoming events and exciting news. Coming in May, we are having an on-demand webinar only. Our May webinar will be available on May 15th on demand. It's called Building Guardify for Law Enforcement, How We're Transforming Digital Evidence Management for Small and Mid-Sized Agencies. A link to this on-demand webinar will be made available in your post-webinar email that you will receive later this afternoon. And while you're there, be sure to explore our full library of free on-demand webinars. Every webinar we've ever done is available on demand, so you could take a look at our full library if this is the first time you're attending. It's packed with valuable insights. This webinar is going to be for law enforcement professionals. So be sure and check out that one. It'll talk all about our new product that we just launched. Also coming in June is a live webinar called Navigating Grief and Justice, Advocacy for Families Impacted by Violent Crime. So mark your calendars. Registration opens soon for this powerful and informative webinar scheduled for June 26th. Keep an eye on your inbox for a registration email that will be coming out in May. Also, a reminder, if you haven't already, please check out Guardify's Real Evidence podcast. Join Ashley and Myron as they explore how technology, people, and processes unite to reshape the landscape of justice and community. Subscribe now. All right, I'm so excited to introduce today's presenter, Katie Good. In her current role, Katie collaborates with Nebraska Accredited Child Advocacy Center members to ensure that children and families receive timely access to high-quality mental health care. She brings over a decade of experience as a therapist and clinical supervisor, specializing in mental health services for individuals and families affected by sexual abuse, trauma, and involvement in the child welfare and legal systems. Katie's clinical training includes trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, or TFCBT, as well as advanced TFCBT applications for youth impacted by commercial child sexual exploitation and those exhibiting problematic sexual behaviors. She's also trained in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR, and has completed the EMDR Child Specialist Intensive Program and holds clinical endorsement training for working with youth who display problematic sexual behaviors. Katie, we're so excited to hear from you. And so with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. So yes, I know that was a lot of words and a lot of things that Carrie just shared today. But I am excited to be here and to be able to talk to everyone in this room about problematic sexual behaviors because that is one of my passions and I get very passionate about it. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to talk about today identifying key characteristics of problematic sexual behaviors. You'll hear me say it PSB because that's a lot less syllables. So much easier to say it that way. We're going to look at enhancing the multidisciplinary communication channels to make sure that our approach is balanced. We're also going to understand how to incorporate from a trauma-informed lens when we're navigating these cases that involve PSB, and then recognizing that importance on mitigating the stigma and harm for juveniles that are engaging in PSB. So before I get into like more content, I would love to see who is in the room. So Mel, if you can pop that up and just share what professional discipline you belong to, because I like to see like who am I speaking to because I don't get to see all of your wonderful faces. It looks like our poll closed.
Yes, so
All right.
I'll give you the results, Katie. You have, let's see, your biggest groups are child welfare and victim family advocates at 24 and 25%. Second to that are mental health professionals and forensic interviewers. And then everyone else makes up anywhere from 5 to 8 or 9%.
Awesome. Yay. Well, I'm excited to see like a good array of who is in the room today. So, oh, the poll made my PowerPoint freak out. Okay, we're good. So, for those of you who have not heard of what problematic sexual behaviors is, or know what it is. I'm a person that really likes to know examples. So if you want to know really the standard definition that has been agreed upon, that comes from ncsby.org. They define it as developmentally inappropriate, potentially harmful, and illegal. I like to be able to share, like, okay, but what does that look like? I'm a very practical kind of person of like, what's it look like in real life? So you might be hearing or seeing cases that are coming through where maybe there's some problematic self-touch or stimulation. Maybe there is non-intrusive, but they're repetitive sexual behaviors. There could be sexual touching without consent or permission, sexual interactions that are developmentally inappropriate, distributing youth-produced sexual images. There could also be sexual contact with animals, or even coercive, aggressive sexual contact and penetration. And really, the reason we call it problematic sexual behaviors is because we're separating the behavior from the youth. Research has showed us that if we're using terms such as like juvenile sex offender or perpetrator, what have you, that actually significantly impacts um, their successful outcomes. And it also, I mean, all of these messages that youth are receiving from adults in their lives, that's where they develop their self concept, right? So it's more than just, hey, Katie doesn't like it when this language is happening. It is no, research is letting us know that this is what's beneficial and helpful as we are talking about these cases. So, what we know about why PSB occurs, there are kind of like three things that I really look at because it's a multitude of things. There's a lot of um, variables that like go into why it would occur. We do know for sure, though, curiosity plays a big role in it. Um, that I think about when we are considering when we're looking at sexual images online, right? I mean, back in I mean, I can age myself a bit. Back when I was younger, like if you had to look something up, you would go into the library and then you would go to the encyclopedia and then you'd look it up in a book, right? Now we have access to the wide web. So you want to look at something, you type it into Google, our favorite friend, and whether we're intentionally or unintentionally looking for sexual images, they're going to come across. You could put something in as like, you know, uh, innocent as you're trying to figure out what Pokemon that you just saw on whatever billboard. You're going to find sexual images. It also can be used as a coping skill. So when we are thinking about, okay, what are the emotional needs of the youth? What is the environment for the youth? That could be a way to cope. It's not a helpful way to cope. However, that would be something then down the road where when we're working with that youth to be thinking about, okay, how can we help them develop healthier coping skills? And then the big one is it imitates closeness and love in the brain. So while not all PSB that occurs because children have experienced trauma, this is something that we need to consider too, is everyone wants to feel love and closeness, right? Like just across the board, all of us want to feel that. The way we go about seeking that and receiving that, again, unhelpful. However, I think it helps us understand and make sense of that. Some big things about just really breaking our misconceptions and the myths that we have around this population. I know if you talk to me, you know, 10 years ago when you were like, oh, yeah, Katie, you're going to work with this population, I'd be like, I don't know about that. Like, I don't know. And we have these myths and we have these biases, and then we learn more. And then that can help us really kind of start challenging our thinking. So I know I highlight and bold some of these things and underline them, just very passionate. So I really want to get that point across of when we're looking at, youth, they are more than just their offenses, and they deserve to be seen in that broader context, right? You wouldn't want to be judged upon one thing that you did in your entire, you know, adolescence or your entire life. We need to be considerate. We need to be thinking about that. Adolescents also are more opportunistic, they're less predatory, and they repeat the behavior less often. The reasons why adults commit sexual crimes and sexual offenses is different than why youth are engaging in problematic sexual behaviors. Youth also engage in fewer sexually abusive behaviors over shorter periods of time, and it's typically less aggressive. What typically happens is if they do engage in another offense, it's less likely for that to be another sexual offense. And then behaviors tend to be really like experimental. Youth are actually rarely fixed in their sexual interests, meaning that their behaviors are going to be more of those experimental behaviors. Another thing is most youth can remain safely in the community during treatment. I know that that is something that we've had a lot of misconceptions around of like, oh, well, we need to make sure that they now are not like even attending school and that they have to do online school and that they can't participate in any of these other activities and that they need to go into some sort of facility to be able to, deal with that, or they need to just sit in, juvenile detention centers until who knows when, right? Um, we can't keep them in the community because we're focusing on really two kinds of things, which I'll get into in a little bit. Also, another important piece to highlight is just because a youth has or had PSB, it does not mean that they were sexually abused. That has been a long held belief, especially before the lovely, internet and things of, well, there's no other way that they could have found out how to do these things, right? So we need to get away from that. That's not accurate. And then many adolescents that do get charged with sex offenses, they can safely attend, public schools, do social activities, community-based clubs, extracurriculars, and that tends to be something that clinicians that see this population are going to recommend that this youth is engaged in some sort of pro-social activity because we want to make sure that they are having those positive interactions with other youth. Um, and it's going to help them feel less isolated. Another important piece to think about too is mental health professionals. We look at, this behavior of youth as much less serious, like psychological problem compared to that same behavior with adults. Um, there is research that says that more than 9 out of 10 teens, the arrest of a youth for a sexual offense is a one-time event, highlighting that piece that I was talking about, where it's like they're more likely to get, an offense for shoplifting or something else than they are for, another sex offense. And then the recidivism rate for juveniles who sexually offend, I think that this is really cool, is 3 to 12%. That's a really good number, especially when we're looking at, and which is why I highlighted it, of that 8 to 58% of other delinquent behavior. That's impressive. That's amazing that that recidivism rate is so low. And that low rate is associated with youth who are receiving appropriate treatment for their sexualized behaviors. So earlier I talked about what really is an important focus. Um, and when we're looking at youth and adults, we need to make sure that we're taking those two things into account. And our priority should be focused on rehabilitation and community safety. We want to make sure that, yes, everyone in the community is safe. And we also want to make sure that, I mean, this was a youth, this is a kid. I think about, a lot of the comics, and I think it's called Zitz. It's whatever the one with like the adolescent, and he does really stupid things like, yeah, I'll go ahead and like be in a laundry basket and I'm gonna like slide off the roof and I'm gonna be fine. I'm not gonna break an arm. It'll be great, right? Like we make stupid choices as adolescents. That doesn't mean that we can't learn from that and do better in the future and make better decisions. So I think that that's a really important piece that we need to be focusing on is rehabilitation and not thinking about punitive, 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 or how could this kid do XYZ, right? That comes from really understanding the whole picture. But we need to focus on how do we help them to be better, you know, humans in the future. I also think that this too, like, plays into the role when we're looking at like placement pieces. So if we're looking at, residential or correctional facilities, like what those, if that should be appropriate for a kiddo. And that really is dependent upon like limited to those with significant community safety risks and those with higher treatment needs. Not every youth is going to need to do that. And if we sent every single youth that engaged in PSB, I mean, we wouldn't have any room at all. It is more common than you actually think. So, how do we attain that balanced response? Because that's really what I want to get to of like, yes, we have a good understanding of PSB. We have a good understanding of these things that maybe we thought were true, or maybe we already knew, like that these were misconceptions. But what do we do now? How do we actually, you know, move forward? So, big thing is remembering we have shared goals, right? We, regardless of your discipline, regardless if you're a victim advocate, regardless if you're law enforcement or a mental health therapist, we have shared goals across the board. We also bring an important piece of the puzzle to that table. And so this is where collaboration comes in key because if we put all those pieces together, we're going to be able to see the whole puzzle and then that would help us in our decision making and making sure that we're not choosing to do things that are going to cause potentially more harm and do less good for this family. We're going to do things that are helpful. So the way that we go about navigating that might look a little bit different. And I think that's where we have to lead with that curiosity and making sure that we're asking questions, right? And being curious about what other people have to say instead of assuming that, you know, this specific discipline is just going to want X. So let's keep in mind, we all want to keep kids safe. We want to assess and respond to treatment needs of the family. We want to assist that youth in learning appropriate behaviors. We also want to make sure that the family unit or the parent, the caregiver, that functioning is improved, that they are monitoring and supervising as appropriate. We're ensuring that community safety and then safeguarding those legal rights of the identified child or adolescent. So then what are some guiding principles? And these situations for, involving PSB of youth are complex and unique. And so these are really principles that I want all of you to keep in mind. You, in each of your disciplines, you're equipped with experience and expertise, and you know that, right? Yes, I'm a clinician. I am not like equipped with legal knowledge or as an FI or what have you. And so that's really why we need to be relying and leaning on each other because we all have an important role. So this is really just a foundation of best practice to address PSB of youth. So you have developmentally appropriate approaches, right? So we have to understand, and I think all of you do understand, is that youth are malleable, right? And they are not like full adults and they are just, that's the way they are. They change, they, you know, adapt. So we need to make sure that we're looking at that too. We also need to establish identification and response strategies that really streamline those services. So figuring out like what's your roadmap, right? Like our effective response starts at the moment that that PSB has been identified. So what do we do next? Also, approach each case as unique. Something that I say and a lot of other individuals who specialize in this population say is if you've met one kid with PSB, you've met one kid with PSB. They all look so different. While, yes, there might be similarities between cases, we have to understand that each of these kiddos is unique. Again, I'll harp on it again, the avoiding unnecessary labels. Um, we know that that is not helpful for these youth, and I know that that is something that is really hard for all of us. Of, those are the terms and that's the language that we use when we are, talking about it amongst our internal teams. But then when we go to a multidisciplinary team where people have other ways of saying it, then we're like, nope, this is kind of how I go about it. This is what I call it. This is what it is. And so I think really what I found to be beneficial and helpful is not saying, hey, you're wrong. We shouldn't say it like that. We need to be mindful and aware of it. It's like, oh, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is, for example, there was a situation where I was in a multidisciplinary team and um, one of the people at the table had said something about, oh, yeah, well, Sally perped on her younger sister. And I was like, oh, okay, so what I'm hearing is Sally engaged in problematic sexual behaviors with her younger sister, right? So we can go about it in a way that is modeling, that I think can be a softer approach, and one that doesn't put us on the defense, and where we really have that psychological safety within those multidisciplinary teams. We also need to integrate the family and community factors. I mean, effective approaches, they involve parents and caregivers. It's not, just, hey, here's my kid, fix them. We need to look at, you know, the entire family unit. Our goal is really to make sure that they have those social bonds, that they have that positive support, that they have peer groups, that they have healthy development, that they have all of those pieces. So we want to make sure that we're looking at every aspect of this kiddo. And then we need to consider the needs of the entire family system. So when we're looking at decisions around supervision or safety planning or intervention or placement, we need to make those with the understanding of the needs, the wishes, the protective capacity, the risks, vulnerabilities, and responsivity to interventions of all family members. And so that's why it's really important for it to be a conversation and helping them, figure out, okay, what are we needing to do for supervision or safety planning? And what do they have the capacity to do? And what are we, doing if something like if, a privacy rule or what have you is broken? Then what are our next steps? Again, coming back to that collaborative approach, that is really like I think just a key. It's crucial really, to these cases is making sure like we want those improved outcomes, right, for youth and families. We want to have like sounder policies and procedures and making sure that we're integrating the family's voice. So we want to do good work. All of us want to do good work. And so let's make sure that we are using that collaborative approach when we are working with this population. We also need to be looking at when you're working with a therapist of, okay, what, how are we assessing? What are we looking at? So if you're sending a kid or referring a kid that you think, hey, needs some additional, like maybe needs treatment around problematic sexual behaviors, you're wanting to look at, okay, what evidence-based practices are available. You're wanting to look at in like how to positively engage the youth and their family. You're looking at what their case specific needs are, their problems, their strengths. It's really important to be looking at their strengths as well. We need to identify, you know, and define those individual family and community targets for reducing those risks and promoting healthy development. Reflect on current functioning and circumstances, reassess as the kiddo develops. Again, like if you think about it, I mean, kiddos, all of us, like our prefrontal cortex did not develop until like our mid 20s, right? So we can't assume that these kids, right, are going to be able to think like little adults. They are going to change, they are going to continue to develop, and we need to reassess. And then we need to integrate information from multiple sources. That is where I really think about that puzzle piece, right? I might have, you know, similar information to what other people might have at that multidisciplinary team, but then there might be another little nugget that I have within my information that if I share that, that can really help, right? And it helps us then make decisions moving forward. We also need to provide focused, effective interventions and treatments. So really like targeted for them specifically because they are unique kiddos, right? Um, so we need to make sure that we're enhancing their well-being, that it's informed by assessment. It matches the most urgent needs for this family and this youth, and it facilitates those protective factors. We also need to have a flexible service delivery continuum. So knowing that, like, okay, isn't meeting the needs of the youth with PSB, the kiddo that was impacted by the PSB, the family members. Really, these interventions that are provided should be no more restrictive than what's needed for community safety and child well-being. So if or when out of home placements or more restrictive interventions are necessary for that safety and behavioral health reasons, those placements should be as short in duration as possible. And then finally, ensuring appropriate training, qualifications, and practice. So professionals, like they have a significant impact on the children, the youth, and the families. And so these professionals need to have relevant coursework, degrees, supervision, training, right, to ensure that they're qualified to work with youth and families. And really, I think about too, just current training within the past 5 years or so, right? Previous models for treating youth were developed off of adult models, right? So if someone was trained back in the 80s or the 90s, okay, things have changed since then. We need to like make sure that we're treating these youth in a way that is not treating them from that adult lens. I think it's also important for non-clinicians to be aware of that like treating a child abused by another child is different than treating a child that's been abused by an adult. And so we really need that specialized training to be able to make sure that we are doing what is, you know, most helpful and beneficial for this population, and we're not causing more harm because nobody wants to be like, yeah, let me cause harm to this kiddo in this family. No one wants to do that. And so let's make sure that we equip ourselves to be able to be successful. Roles and responsibilities, that one I know is something that comes up a lot here locally in Nebraska of understanding like, our different roles and responsibilities. And so I'm sure it is something that is felt across the board. So I like to just give a brief overview of like when we're looking at, you know, our decision making, and the lens that we're coming from, and that really we're all coming at it of like, we want to be collaborative, we want to have best practices and communication in any of our efforts. We need to understand about that the decision making responsibilities are going to depend upon where, like, what our role is within it. So, for child welfare and child protection professionals, their role and responsibility assessing and addressing child safety and protection from abuse versus law enforcement and juvenile justice professionals. They're determining if a law has been broken and what pathway will facilitate public safety and youth rehabilitation. So, like, is it adjudication? Is it diversion? Is it deferred prosecution? What's the pathway that we're looking at? For health and behavioral health professionals, they're assessing for well-being and vulnerabilities and risks and needs and protective factors, looking at that safety planning, providing recommendations around therapeutic services. And then school personnel assessing and implementing and monitoring safety plans while promoting positive social emotional well-being and academic progress of the students. I think this can get a little bit challenging sometimes too, and something that um, I've seen happen in supervising clinicians, especially in rural areas. So I had a clinician I was working with, and she was seeing a kiddo who engaged in problematic sexual behaviors. He had a supervision safety plan for home, and then there was a discussion about having one at school. And so she came to me and was like, what do I do about this? Like, how do I navigate this? And I was like, okay, so if you are like, what is the school wanting to know, like, what they should do, right? Within their parameters, also maintaining like this youth's privacy, right? And if there is a safety plan that's going in place at the school, making sure that there is a time limit, right? Because they're going to put it in that kiddo's file. And so we want to make sure that, yep, this is only like from August of 2025 until, you know, October of 2025. That's the time frame when it is like active. Outside of that, like you need to ignore that document, right? It's now not active, it's not relevant, so on and so forth. So there's nuances and things to navigate, and it's always like this is where I think consultation comes in and that collaboration comes in is it's like, okay, well what should we do? How should we navigate that? That's new, that's different. I've never experienced this before. And so being able to be willing to have those conversations and ask those questions, I think can be really beneficial. And I know, I mean, even I still have like, okay, that's not happened in my experience. What do I do? And then I reach out for consultation to be like, hey, have you experienced this? Like, what would be your recommendations on how I should navigate? So I think there's a lot of room for us to continue to be, um, you know, learning regardless of how old we are. That might also just be, a millennial thing of me. I did a training a few days ago about millennials and generations, and I'm like, yep, I'm a lifelong learner, so probably probably plays a role. Um, Ultimately, I think too that we have, really great education. We have knowledge in our areas. We have that experience and that expertise. And sometimes I think we just need to listen to the youth, and get out of like, well, this is what I was taught, and this is what I know, and this is XYZ, yada, yada, yada. There was a research article provided by McGibbon in 2017, and they looked at youth that had PSB, and this was like after the fact, um, after, the PSB had occurred and what have you, and they were able to identify what would have been helpful for them to prevent their PSB. And so, really, they came up with three things. Okay. One was looking at reforming their sexuality. So, things like comprehensive sex education, learning about respectful relationships, learning about sex, age, and consent. And I know that varies state to state, right? Of like, what is the age of consent in Nebraska versus California versus South Dakota? Looking at redressing their victimization. So, if they did experience victimization, we have to have a supportive response to that, right? We can't be like, well, you did this bad thing, so it doesn't matter that something bad happened to you. No, we need to be supportive and make sure that we're addressing that as well. And then helping their management of porn. Like I said, you're gonna kids now, they whether intentionally or unintentionally, they will come across something that is sexually exploitive material. Right around peak ages are like 10 or 11. And so I know I always like to give examples. But when I was working with a family, and was talking about porn and really like trying to make sure, like, yep, I'm the therapist and you are the parents, right? Like, you guys make the decisions. It's not my decision of like what camp you want to go down. But I provided them like, well, there's these different camps of belief around, pornography. And so there's the camp of, it's time we talked, where we know that they're going to access it. We are going to have conversations around it. We are going to help them be critical uh, thinkers about, okay, so what we see in porn that isn't like real life relationships versus what we experience in real life. Or on the opposite side, there is like fight the new drug of like the impacts on the brain, the impacts on, your relationships. And so I was like, hey, here's two options. Like, ultimately, you're the parent. You get to decide like which way you want to go. But it really helped them play a big role in what their child received as education. And I just gave them the options. And if we address these things, right, we're better able to understand and treat these youth in a way that's trauma informed. And it helps us mitigate further harm because ultimately, if we're not providing this to youth, they're going to learn about it from their peers. They're going to learn about it not from you at all, which could be inaccurate information. And I think us as professionals, it can be uncomfortable, but I think we need to get over that fear that like, okay, if we tell them about this or we encourage parents to tell them about this, right, that they're going to go and do it. We know that's not true, right? Like we have that same belief around like topics such as suicide. If I ask a kid if they're planning to kill themselves, then that's just, you know, then that's what they're going to do. They're going to go and do it because I asked it. And it's no, we need to make sure that we listen to the youth that we're working with. When I get into like, the rehabilitation and the community safety, and then when looking at when we have a mental health provider that's now involved, and we're looking at assessment and trying to figure out what do we do for this youth. Um, I really think when we're at that MDT, we need to be focusing on these factors, right? We need to be focusing on the protective and the supportive factors, not sitting and thinking about, okay, here's all the awful things that they did, and this is how high risk or moderate risk or what have you these youth are. I know that we can get really focused in and honed in on risk assessments. Um, and James Warling, he's a PhD, he's a clinical and forensic psychologist in Canada. Um, he's great. I love him. He's come to speak multiple times where I've been able to attend, and he's offered for us to come to Canada because he's like, you guys are so smart. And I was like, might take you up on that. We'll see. Canada could be fun. So he developed the Eraser, which is the estimate of risk of adolescent sexual offense recidivism back in 2000, so a handful of years ago. And he also developed the Dash 13, which is the desistance for adolescents who sexually harm. And he actually has shifted from that and developed the Professor, which is the protective and risk observations for eliminating sexual offense recidivism. So glad that he shortens it because wow, that is a mouthful. And that was in 2017. And so he really changed, and I want to share from his website of pieces that he talked about and why his belief process had changed. So he talks about how the eraser, it was his hope that a risk assessment tool could provide an adequate degree of predictive accuracy to assist with forensic decisions. The research support regarding predictive accuracy has not been consistently strong. So we haven't seen that be very strong. He says, there are several reasons why I'm now choosing to use the professor rather than the existing risk prediction measures that have been widely used in the past. Talks about how in a meta-analysis, so looking at multiple things, research regarding the predictive validity of the JSOAP2, JSERAT2, eraser, and the static 99 concluded that all four measures provided estimates that were above chance levels. However, given that the effect sizes were moderate, these tools may be insufficient to make predictions that require a high degree of precision. Between 1/3 and 100% of the risk factors on the popular risk prediction tools studied are static. Adolescents are not. There are some factors on these popular risk prediction measures that are not consistently supported in the literature as risk factors for youth. Of course, this significantly compromises the validity of the risk prediction measures. He goes on to then share that a popular risk assessment tools reviewed contain only risk factors and there are no protective factors. And there have been a number of recent advances in the field with respect to strengths and protective factors, and it is now widely held that assessments for individuals who have offended sexually should be focused on both protective and risk factors. And I think what is most common that I hear come up is that categorization of low, moderate, or high risk on some of those risk tools can be misused and misunderstood. So these are important things as this is what he does, right? He develops these tools, he does this research, he's an amazing individual, and I think we need to listen to, okay, he's learned and adapted and changed. And now when he goes and testifies, he's like, I don't testify to risk because I can't predict the future. And so shifting our belief of like, well, we need to have a risk assessment. We need to know if they're low, moderate, or high. It's like, do we really? Or do we need to be looking at risks with protective factors such as these things, right? Such as those healthy boundaries, such as those protections from harm and other trauma, parental guidance and supervision, the healthy friendships, open communications about feelings with a trusted adult, successful experiences and successful skills, and adaptive coping skills for these youth. And then finally, we look at engaging in appropriate services. So, Carrie, I think you like rubbed your cough off on me.
Sorry.
It's okay. Um, so one thing to keep in mind if you are not a clinician, um, or if you think like, okay, I have this kid that has problematic sexual behaviors, I need to get them a psychosexual evaluation. Not all of them need it, so that's going to be dependent upon case by case basis. And really, pieces that I talked about earlier when we're looking at those guiding principles of like what actually needs to be captured in a good assessment. Um, and then if it is needed, if there are increased safety risks, what have you, then you might be looking at doing a psychosexual evaluation. There are different modalities that I think are really important to be like keeping an eye out of, okay, is this clinician trained in these different things, or are they trained in TFCBT and they say, yeah, I can see PSB, but they don't have, for example, that trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy training for problematic sexual behaviors. There's a lot of information around each of these and what each of them really focus on. So you have that multi-systemic therapy for PSB. You've got the classic PSB CBT, which includes like that group model too, where there's individual treatment as well as like a group component with parents and kiddos. And then there's also advanced training for PCIT, or parent-child interaction therapy. So there are different modalities to keep your eye out on, to be thinking about, okay, if you are a clinician, I want to learn more and possibly serve this population. This is what you can be looking for. If you're not a clinician, are the clinicians that you're looking at, do they have these modalities? Or are they just telling you, yeah, I can work with anyone ages 0 to 18? Okay, what is allowing you to know that, and feel confident in being able to get them into those services? We also do, and I know it can vary too by nuances, but we have on the Nebraska Mental Health website, it's nebraskamentalhealth.com. We have like a section about different evaluations, like what they are, when to refer to them, what they should include, and then who can complete them. Um, so our information on that is Nebraska based. However, um, something to just be helpful in understanding like just the different evaluations that can come up. So then really, I mean, this is where I want to open it to the group of another poll of what's one thing that you can implement from here? What's a takeaway to better serve this population? Maybe you came in with, you know, a wealth of knowledge around PSB. Um, maybe you didn't, but what's something that a nugget that you can take, or things that you feel like you would need additionally?
Still looks like we have a few people answering, but I think it's almost done. Okay. Uh-oh. Said failed to share the poll.
Can you share some like things that you're seeing?
I can't see the results.
Oh,
I I'll be the one that will join. Hi everyone, this is Melissa. So Katie, we actually have a couple. So one of the attendees mentioned like acquiring and spreading the knowledge to the community when needed. And that PSB does not mean that a child was sexually abused in the past. Is a huge change in thinking, which you really brought home. So thank you for that. And then someone else mentioned like getting them into therapy, finding a therapist that are educated in PSB, which is a really good point. Someone else mentioned being open to new ways of thinking, get more specific training and modalities to serve kiddos with PSB. Someone else mentioned removing the stigma and better educating others on the subject. There's like a couple of those about like the stigma language of PSB and helping clients feel comfortable and not judged. Safety planning with parents is very important, having them involved, as you mentioned in the beginning. The continuing education and collaboration, because you also mentioned like if you did this back in the day, research is always constantly changing. So, yes, for that continuing education. Someone else mentioned instead of focusing on the risk factors, taking into account for the protective factors as well, the family's strength. And then also addressing your own personal boundaries with how I view and respond to child with PSB. And I've used the term juvenile offenders, but they mentioned they'll stop doing that after this training. That's pretty awesome. And then I'm going to take it back to you, Katie, unless you want me to keep on going.
sounds good. Yeah. I appreciate hearing all of those things, and I know it is not a process of perfection, right? You're gonna stumble and you're going to, it's just something to keep in mind as you are, constantly learning and taking in new information. Um, Here is my contact information. I know we'll have some time to like open it up for questions and what have you, but if you do want to get a hold of me, here is how you can. You can give me a call at that number. You can email me at kgood@nebraskacacs.com, or you can go to our website and then link up with me that way too. Um, so I think we're good for questions to start.
Yeah, great. We had several good questions, Kim and Katie. So I'll start with this one that just came in, and they quoted a stat that you mentioned. Recidivism rate among juveniles who sexually offend is typically 3 to 12% versus 8 to 58% for other delinquent behavior. And their question is this stat with or without treatment services, or is it with a lower treatment even? Is it, or is it even lower with treatment? Sorry, I'm not reading that correctly.
Yeah, so that is with appropriate treatment services, um, is that 3 to 12%. It tends to be closer to like the 3% range, but that is with treatment.
Got it. And you mentioned, some modalities that are best practice. And someone had a question. Would these modalities work for someone with a porn addiction? That was their question.
So, as I spoke to earlier with like problematic sexual behaviors and what it can look like, and that's why I really like to go like, what could you be seeing, right? Could they be having some issues with, self-stimulation or viewing of like pornography? Then that would be a therapist I would be reaching out to of like who is trained in problematic sexual behaviors, because if it is problematic, yeah, we want to get that addressed. And that would be the avenue I would go to, because it would not be beneficial to go to someone from that adult lens.
Got it. Thank you. And someone just asked for a clarification on something you mentioned regarding, the age and at which children are exposed to, pornographic images. They said, did you say that the peak age of experimentation with pornographic images is 10 or 11? And is it normal for a 10-year-old to be looking at those sorts of images?
Yeah, so yeah, the peak age that kiddos would be either intentionally or unintentionally being exposed to pornography is 10 or 11, right in that like age range. That's yeah, pretty common. And the way we went about like viewing inappropriate material in the past was through magazines and different things like that, right? We have access to the internet, so it's not uncommon for youth to be accessing that material at that young of an age.
Got it. Someone asked, can you recommend some specific therapeutic intervention trainings for therapists?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of what OU puts on, which is PSB CBT. That one is when we're looking at youth who are engaging in problematic sexual behaviors. It has a group component to it as well, which I think is critical. And then there's another one that they also put on, which is TFCBT PSB. However, that one is a little bit different where there's PSB that's been related to trauma. I know they have one currently coming up in this month, which is full. And then I think the next one that they have is in September. And then the PSB CBT, it's like a whole group of clinician kind of a thing, which I think they told me last year that they're looking out like multiple years. So that would be connecting with OU, and I have some people that I can direct you guys to be able to reach out.
Yeah, that's great. I know the clinicians at the CAC where I worked were trained at OU and just talked about how great it was. And I've heard such great things. So thank you for that. This is an interesting question. Which agencies or therapists or types of therapists would you recommend? And would it be different for a kiddo that struggles with PSB but is on the spectrum?
Oh, I love that question. Oh, so um, something cool that OU does have is on their website, they have um, like the US, like a picture of the US, and then all of the places that they've trained. So then you can see, like, in your state, right, in your area, what are the agencies that you can directly go to that have had that training, which is really cool. When we're looking at those adaptations with autism spectrum, because this is another population I really love. Because prior to working with youth with PSB, I did work directly with kiddos on the spectrum. And so there were those pieces of knowledge that I already had about working with kiddos on the spectrum, as well as then putting that with PSB. I think when you're looking at that, it's helpful for clinicians to have an understanding of both. There is a book, I'm gonna roll back in my chair, that I recommend, and it is called An Introduction to Autism Spectrum Disorders, Sexual Behaviors, and Therapeutic Intervention, and it's by Gerry, Gerry, Blasingame, Blasingame. But this is a great, great book to really give you some like helpful information and looking at assessment and all of those things.
That's great. Melissa, I hope you got the name and author of that book to put in the chat for everyone. I know people are going to ask that question. I thought this was an interesting question. So someone posed this scenario. You have a child that sexually acted out on a younger sibling. There's a history of sexual abuse by a family member, and then sexually acts out on a peer their age. And can you differentiate between, normal sexual exploration and offending? And the attendee says, I feel like there's some views that have been held that once a child has had some PSB behavior, that they are no longer allowed to have age appropriate sexual exploitation. That from that point on, everything they do, they have a motivation to victimize. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. One of the things that I think about that is like figuring out what's concerning and what's not. Um, Again, another resource. Gosh, I'm gonna have to get them to you, Mel. Um, that I use a lot comes um, from Sea Casa, which is out in Australia. And it's actually at my desk. So luckily I'm here in my office. So you should see like this red, yellow, and green diagram. And that is really helpful that I've used not only for myself as a clinician, but when I work with caregivers and helping them like understand of like, okay, yes, this thing happened and now I'm on high alert, right? Which makes sense because of what has happened. And then also, we have had some of our CACs keep them in the observation rooms so that when other disciplines are in those observation rooms viewing the FI and listening to that, then they can be, helping figure out like, okay, is what this kiddo saying, does that lean into concerning? Does that lean here? And so it's called the age appropriate sexual behavior. In children and young people. And so it goes from little kids all the way up to adolescents and talking about what's typical healthy sexual behavior, what's concerning, and then what's very concerning to really help you kind of navigate that because they are still like sexual beings. They will still, continue to develop. So we just need to be aware of like where our concern should lie.
Right. That makes sense. Okay, have time for a few more questions. For PSB kiddos, how do you navigate reintroducing them, excuse me, to the community when that community is often shared by their victims in schools and public places, where, they may have committed, the behavior in the first place?
That's a great question. And I think too, there's more nuances when you look at a rural community versus an urban. Um, and so I think when we look at and we have treated youth, we are, helping them determine like what information does get shared or needs to be shared with others in the community. Um, we're making sure that not only the youth that caused the harm is getting into services, but the youth who was impacted by the harm is getting into those services. We do reparation work. So making sure that like there has been, a level of repair from those behaviors. So um, that can look like um, letters that have been written from the youth who engage in the problematic sexual behavior, apologizing and sharing what they will do in the future. Um, if it is within the family unit, then we make sure that the caregivers are involved there too, to make sure like, hey, I'm going to protect you and make sure that you have XYZ, and then I'm going to make sure that you are accountable for your behaviors XYZ. When it is with someone else in the community, I can tell you when situations have not gone well, where there was a lot of feelings, especially with social media, and I got blasted. Um, and then that family ended up having to move from their neighborhood community. Um, that was a long time ago, that occurred. However, I think it's critical that we make sure that we're not just broadcasting that information everywhere and being um, very mindful of when we are sharing information with the school, when we like are sharing information with this kid's coach, um, and making sure that they have those like healthy pro-social interactions and that they are involved in that, and that it's not like, oh, okay, we know Billy did all of these things, and so now they're outcasted. They already feel, isolated and outcasted, so we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. But yeah, so it's it's a case by case basis, really, in that, and it depends on what is happening within the community and if it's rural versus urban. Um, and then I think too, if you have somebody who is coming from like maybe they did um like a residential, treatment, and then as a step down from that to help them reintegrate right into the community, then maybe they have left that residential. Now they're doing outpatient, right? And they're working to make sure like they can stay safe within the community, that they still are following all their, supervision guidelines and utilizing those adaptive, healthy coping skills and have those friendships and pro-social activities before they then fully would graduate, right, from that program to be able to then be within the community. So two-pronged kind of response.
Thank you. Okay, so to kind of, switch sides here for a moment, and kind of look at the child who maybe has been touched inappropriately. What differences do you see in those children who've been abused by another child, like a PSV child, versus those who have been abused by adults?
That is a really good question. A lot of times in my experience, I mean, I kind of think of it as like this continuum of coercion, right? Um, and what I mean by that is it could be like, hey, do you want to do this? Like, I saw this, you want to do this? And then it could be like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, because maybe it's an older brother and your older brother is your best friend, right? And so like you don't know what that is, but you say, yeah, sure, why not? Like, because you want to hang out with your older brother. Maybe it is, I'm not going to give you your toys back until you do XYZ, right? And then we have those layers to it versus when we're looking at an adult. Um, in my experience, in my cases that I've had, there's been more fear um, from that versus like, well, no, I did that with my brother because, like he asked me to, or he wasn't going to give me this, or he was gonna let me play video games on his console, and he never lets me do that. Um, so there's not been as much fear between siblings or like another youth as I've seen with those who have been abused by an adult. And a lot of those kiddos too have those like messages of like, nobody loves you. I'm the only one that loves you. If you tell, you're going to get in trouble. If you know, I'm going to go to jail. It's going to be your fault. That type of thing is not happening necessarily as much with youth.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, well, I think that we are at the end of our time to be able to take questions. So if you did not get your question answered, like I said, Katie is going to answer all of them later in the form of an email, so you will get them answered eventually. So it does look like we are reaching the end of our time today. So once again, please be on the lookout today for an email this afternoon that will explain how you can complete the evaluation form, receive your certificate of attendance, and contact our presenter. Katie, thank you so much for giving your time today. This was such great information on behalf of all of us here at Team Guardify. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. And thank you everyone who attended today.